Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, started and I'm not even ready. So, inshallah, if you guys can hear me, please just type Assalamu alaikum. We were supposed to do a live feed yesterday, but subhanAllah, Brother Bilal Abdul Kareem that we were supposed to be speaking to, we couldn't get in touch with him. Many of you guys may not know that the current security situation on the ground here in Syria is very difficult, unfortunately. So please keep the ummah in du'as. Alhamdulillah, Brother Bilal is well, and inshallah ta'ala, today we have another guest. As you guys know, we're trying to tackle this topic, which is racism within Muslim communities. Many people have been saying, why are you tackling this topic? Why is it something that's important to you? You're in Syria, stay in your lane, this doesn't concern you. And what I say to them people is that as an ummah, there's no harm in working on the different illnesses that we have as an ummah. It's incumbent upon all of us to discuss these issues, to open this dialogue, to see how we can work together to better ourselves. So inshallah, this is what part of the aim is, inshallah ta'ala. It's to try and open dialogue so that we can understand the illnesses that we have in this ummah. And one of the important things to understand is if we don't realize that we have a sickness, then we will never find the cure. And unfortunately for me, this has been a journey where, subhanAllah, I've spoken to many people now about racism within the Muslim community, and many people, subhanAllah, choose to turn a blind eye. Many people, to my surprise, believe that it doesn't exist. It's a non-issue. And for me, that's one of the reasons that I feel that it's even more important that we discuss this topic. We must hear the voices within our community that are suffering in silence and try to understand the different sides of the story, inshallah ta'ala. So today's guest, inshallah, is a very, how can I say, prominent speaker within the black Muslim community. She's a sister, alhamdulillah, and she's an author, she's a spoken word artist. Inshallah, I'm sure that she's going to have a very interesting perspective on this issue. So inshallah, without further ado, I'm going to try and get her, bring Sister Naima B. Roberts into our conversation, inshallah. For any of you guys that are joining us now, please share this video so we can bring in as many people as possible, inshallah ta'ala. Hit a share on the left hand corner of your screen. Sister Naima, if you're there, say salamu alaikum so we can see if you're there. It's got a bit of a picture there. Let's see. Approve. Okay. No answer. Alright, Sister Naima, I'm trying to get you on. It's saying no. When I press approve, it says no answer from live video guest. Maybe there's an issue on your side, inshallah ta'ala. So alright, we're going to try and sort out this technical difficulty. Maybe you can log in and log back in, inshallah. Log out and log back in, sorry. Muhammad Bilal Naru, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Musa, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, for those of you that are just joining us now, we are talking about racism within the community, inshallah ta'ala. Now, this is a very important topic, and it's one of those topics that I feel is addressed very rarely, and it's something that a lot of people maybe don't understand is taking place within Muslim communities. Many people say, oh, there's racism in all communities, there's racism in every single place that you go to, and that's true. But many people are shocked when they find out that we expect this between people who don't have an understanding of Islam, people who are not Muslim. But for Muslims to have this kind of treatment between each other is something that is very difficult, and it's something that is a trait of Jahiliyyah, or ignorance, and something that we just cannot stand for today. Sister Naima, if you can hear me, wassalam, Sister Naima. I'm trying to add you into the conversation, and it is saying that you're denying it. So I don't know what that is all about, which is very strange. Sorry guys, there's technical difficulties going on here right now. Sister Naima, maybe it's the device that you're using, and that's the reason why we can't get you on. I don't know why. Please remove Sister Naima from your broadcast. So I'm sure there's a technical difficulty on your side, inshallah ta'ala. What I'm going to do is, while we're waiting for Sister Naima to sort it out, and I hope she can sort it out, otherwise we're not going to have another guest again today. What we'll try and do is, I'll give you a bit of background information on Sister Naima. I wanted her to do this herself, but inshallah, as we're having technical difficulties, I'll try and give you a bit of background. So Sister Naima B. Roberts is a Muslim, black, mixed race, South African, Western Reaver and woman all in one. This is what it says here. Okay, mashallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Finally, we got there.
Alhamdulillah, finally. I was thinking, subhanallah, yani, it's not going to happen, alhamdulillah. Was it something on your side, something with your phone?
Yeah, I think my phone was on Do Not Disturb, so that was a bit of a problem. And then I had to rotate the phone, but alhamdulillah, we're here now, mashallah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. What time is it in the UK at the moment? It looks like nice and bright. You are in the UK, right?
Yes, it's still very bright and warm outside.
Okay, alhamdulillah. It's about 8 o'clock, I'm assuming there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so inshallah, before we start today's discussion, which is obviously racism within Muslim communities, can you give us a bit of background on yourself? Were you born a Muslim? How did you come to Islam? And what was it about Islam that attracted you?
Okay, well, my parents are, I'm of mixed parentage. So my father is a white South African and my mother is a black South African. And they were together against the apartheid laws. If the listeners and the viewers know anything about, apartheid South Africa, it was actually illegal for, black and white to marry or have relationships. And that's how we ended up in the UK. And that's how I ended up being born in Leeds. So I wasn't born a Muslim. I became Muslim at university. And it's funny that you ask about, what drew me to Islam, because a big part of my embracing Islam was, it's actually so ironic because I was in the middle of a big identity transition. Many mixed race people can probably relate to this actually, because sometimes you only kind of are aware of your race when you are in a country where you're in the minority. And you now have to get to grips with what it means to be Asian, what it means to be brown, what it means to be black, because now you're a minority and the majority has got certain ideas about you. So anyway, while I was at university, I was very much into identity politics, into sort of pro-African, pro-black politics. And it was in that context that I actually came across Islam. And the reason
were you sorry to cut you, were you one of those people that when it comes to nationality, you had difficulty trying to check one of the boxes?
Yeah, kind of, because it's kind of, I'm actually, I think, white and black African according to the paperwork, but I considered myself Zimbabwean because I grew up in Zimbabwe, but my parents are South African. But the reason I did not embrace Islam straight away was that I saw Islam as a religion for Asians and Arabs. And I wasn't prepared to give up my identity in order to become Muslim. And it was only when I went to Africa, to Senegal and to Guinea, which, as you probably know, are historically Muslim countries, It was only then that I realized that there was no conflict between being African and being Muslim. And that was when I was able to be free to actually embrace Islam. And so that's kind of my story.
So that's really interesting. So what you're saying is that whilst you were in the UK, you'd seen certain aspects of Islam through, I'm assuming, da'wah and so on and so forth. But because it felt that it was attributed to a certain culture, you didn't want to, what's it called, revert to Islam or enter Islam because you thought you'd have to give up certain parts of your culture.
Yeah, I just think, you know, you see it so often in the UK and elsewhere as well, that somebody becomes Muslim and the expectation is they're going to start cooking or eating Asian food. They're going to start wearing shalwar, especially if they are married to an Asian. Like, you're going to wear that dupatta, okay? You're going to wear that shalwar kameez no matter what. And so I resisted that because I had fought so much already to be proud to be who I was, to be an African, to be black, to be mixed race or whatever.
Let me tell you something. Raquel makes a really good roti, by the way.
MashaAllah. Good for her.
So yeah, sometimes cross, obviously, culture can be a good thing, but of course, like you're saying, to lose someone's identity is something difficult. And I think this is something that when you travel, it opens up your mind and your understanding. I think for a lot of people, even as for myself growing up, I remember that I had a certain understanding of Islam based upon being brought up in an Asian Pakistani family. And it was only when I traveled and I went to certain countries and I saw people praying Salah in a different way, it completely changed things for me. And I realized that, you know what, there's not one look for Islam or not one version for Islam in a sense. So
yeah, exactly.
If you could speak to us a little bit about your difficulties, what difficulties have you faced as a black Muslim? Because that's what a lot of us want to hear about. It's, of course, it's interesting that subhanAllah, that one of the reasons why you didn't want to enter Islam was because obviously you didn't want to give up parts of your culture. But when you did enter Islam, did you face difficulties? Did you face, how can I say, discrimination? What would you refer to? Would you refer to it as anti-blackness, or would you refer to it as, in a sense, outright racism?
Okay, Bismillah. One thing I'd like to say right now is when I was listening to your introduction to this talk, I found it so ironic because Asian people and Arabs are not strangers to racism. I do believe that in this country, Paki bashing was a thing. I do believe that there was a time when white boys used to go out on a Friday, on a Saturday to look for Pakistanis, to beat them up, to call them names, to denigrate them, to humiliate them because of racism. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when it comes to Arabs, anti-Arab racism, calling them ragheads, calling them sand dusters or whatever it is, especially in the States, this is not something that is unknown. So for me, for any people to say, oh, we don't know what racism is, oh, racism doesn't exist, as if they've never experienced it themselves, for me, it's very, very ironic. So I can say for myself, because I wear the niqab, because I'm fairly light-skinned, I pass for anything. That's the truth. People don't see me and automatically know that I'm black, and that's a reality that I'm aware of. But my children do look black. Anyone can see that my children look black. My husband looks black. So I know what it means for people to see you and make an assumption. And I think the issue in our communities in the UK still is that they are culturally chauvinistic. Okay, so there's two things at play. There's cultural chauvinism, which is the belief that our culture is superior. Okay, whether we're Pakistani, whether we're Indian, whether we're Bengali, whether we're Arab, Kurdish, Turkish, whatever, we have a superiority complex. We believe our culture is the best. Our food is the best. Our clothes are the best. At the end of the day, we've got our thing. So there's cultural chauvinism. But at the end of the day, being pleased and proud of your culture is not haram. But what happens is people take it to the level where they look down on other people who are not from that culture. And I can say that this happens across the board, not just with black people, because I know that even Indians look down on Pakistanis, and Pakistanis don't like Indians, and they all look down on Bengalis because of the cultural chauvinism, not necessarily racism.
That's right, that's right.
Because of the cultural chauvinism. Now, add that to a society that is structurally racist and that has been built on prejudice and racist ideas, particularly about black people, you have basically a double whammy. Because I know that there are many more cultural Muslims who are maybe of Pakistani origin who don't like Goras. They look down on Goras. They don't think much of them. They think their culture is dirty. You know, their people don't have morals. Their food is terrible. So that's the cultural chauvinism. But it's not the same, because white people are not racially discriminated against in this country. Black people
As
are.
a general, you mean?
You know what I'm saying? So not only do you consider yourself superior because of your culture, but you're also in a context that looks down on and denigrates black culture, black values, black language, black hair, black looks, the whole thing, you know. So this is the issue. And, you know, for me, why I think this is an issue for us as Muslims, and it's not a black issue. It's not a black issue. And that's really important for people to understand. Because if you have an ounce of asabiya in you, you know you've got a problem. As a Muslim, it is not acceptable for you to look down on anyone, let alone somebody who is not your lineage or not of your people. We know Islamically that this is very problematic. And not only that, this kind of racism, a lot of it, when you go back to the roots, it is a superiority thing, and it's to do with pride. And we know the status of pride in this ummah. So when you look at people who hold racist ideas and judge people according to race, you find a lot of the time they have this superiority complex, and they have this pride that, you know, I won the lottery. I did well. I'm white, I'm light, you know, I'm Asian, whatever the case may be. And so what we're doing is we're replicating the racism of the wider society within our communities. Because guess what?
Okay, so
can I just finish this?
So
point?
would it be
In the wider society, Muslims are a minority. Okay? In the wider society, even Asians, we're all a minority, okay? And we're all discriminated against, and there's levels. But in the Muslim community, there is a dominant culture, and then there are minorities within that culture. And so what we are doing is we're replicating exactly what's happening in the wider culture, where the dominant culture sets the parameters. It sets what is acceptable, what is desirable. And if you are not of that dominant culture, you basically are lower and lower and lower. And we're doing the same thing within the ummah, because the dominant culture, whether it's Arab or Asian or whatever, is doing the exact same thing. It's setting its own cultural standards as the norm, and everybody else is basically, you know, ghair apne, like, you know, not of us, and less than, and still needs to work its way up, you know, it still needs to come closer to where we are. And I think that's what I see happening. And the issue is, it's a sickness in our hearts. This is the issue. And that's why it's something everybody should be worried about.
So, I mean, that's a really interesting perspective that you're saying, that this is on a worldwide setting, that of course we have institutionalized racism, or you could say maybe after post-colonization, a lot of this racism still lingers. So would you in a sense say, look, we can't actually blame Muslims, because a lot of these Muslims are living in this society and it rubs off on them? Would it be fair to say something like that, or would that be making an excuse? And this is what people listening to you would say, okay, so we're living in this society and it's not our fault if we're ignorant on some of these issues, because this is what we're seeing in the media, and so on and so forth.
I'm not giving anybody a pass on this. I'm not going to give anybody a pass, and I'll tell you why. Everyone has access to the knowledge, and nowadays we're not talking about the older generation, okay? The older generation have ideas that have been built up over decades. We are talking about our generation. We are talking about a generation that grew up in multicultural Britain, or multicultural USA, or wherever. So that excuse for me is not acceptable, because at the end of the day,
Hello. I don't know if you guys can you guys hear me? I don't know if I've lost Sister Naima or you guys have lost me. Assalamu alaikum. If you guys can hear me, just put a number 1 on your screen, because I don't know if we've lost the sister, or my live feed is still saying that we're live, inshallah ta'ala. So hopefully we can get sister. That subhanAllah, the sister is saying, I think we've lost the sister, but inshallah we'll try and get her back on. It's really, really interesting, Sister Naima, live in a society where people have this chauvinistic superiority, in a sense that they always think their culture is better. That's one thing, and that's a level of ignorance, in a sense. And then the second level of ignorance is that if you're from a certain community which is looked down or regarded upon as being lower, that's a double whammy, in a sense. So subhanAllah, I mean, this is something that, me being a foreigner here in Syria, I kind of understand this, because when it comes to cultural superiority, a lot of the Syrians here, and it's not their fault because many of them haven't left Syria, they believe that Syria is the best. Aleppo was the best city in the world. Damascus was one of the best cities in the world. They have the best food. They have the best culture. And many of these people that we deal with are people that are generally from the countryside and so on and so forth. They're not well-traveled people. So that cultural chauvinism or superiority definitely exists. So I definitely understand that. Inshallah, we're going to try and get Sister Naima back on, because subhanAllah, I think she has a very, very interesting perspective, and I want to quiz her a lot more. Parveen Akhtar is saying everyone thinks that they are the best, and she's saying ask anybody. So if you guys have any questions, please get your questions in, so that when we get Sister Naima back on, that inshallah we can fire our questions away at her. Of course, I've got a list of questions that I have, but we'd also like to hear from you guys as well, in regards to what you think about this issue. Now, subhanAllah, this is an issue that's become, of course, very hot recently between British Muslims, because of the recent comments that were made by Brother Abu Ibrahim. May Allah accept his good work and forgive him for any shortcomings that he has. And of course, by some of the comments that another brother, Nabil Abdul Rashid, made, and highlighting that he did of this issue. May Allah also forgive him of his shortcomings and accept any good work that he's doing. And ultimately, may Allah unite all of us as brothers and sisters. What I've seen from this issue is that, subhanAllah, it's created an atmosphere of two sides. And subhanAllah, for me, this is really saddening, because we are supposed to be one ummah. And when you see that people are now becoming sides and people are blindly defending, and I want to make this clear, that I've seen from many black Muslims an air of superiority. Some of them think that, look, we don't need, or maybe they've been pushed to think this way, that we don't need these people's appreciation, or we don't need any approval from these Asians, for example. And then on the complete extreme opposite, you have Asians who completely deny that this exists. They will say that there's no racism in the Muslim community, there's no racism between from the Asian community towards black Muslims, and so likewise. I also think that this also takes place within Arab communities. There's a lot of racism from the Arab community towards other people. And I think what Sister Naima was saying is very true, that yes, when you have a majority running the show, or majority, there will always be this superiority complex there. Now, the only, how can you say, cure to this disease is Islam. And Islam will remove that superiority complex, because Islam tells us that there's no difference between a Arab or an Ajab, Arab or someone who's a non-Arab, except for taqwa. So this is really, really important to understand. Muhammad Amin says, no one is racist until you want to marry their daughter. Allahu Mustan. Um, and you see, this is an interesting topic that I was discussing about, and that's an interesting point, Brother Muhammad Amin. What we need to understand is, and this is something that I'd like to ask the sister when she comes back on, that when it comes to marriage, are these actually prejudices or is it racism? Because in Islam as well, there is a concept of people marrying within their same communities. And for example, the four madhahib, they agree that if a woman wants to marry outside of her culture, so this is Imam Abu Hanifa, this is Imam Shafi rahimullah, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and Imam Malik, they all say that if a father restricts his daughter from marrying into a different culture, and that's his only reason, it does not strip him from the wilaya. So this is a concept, I want to be fair and I want people to understand, this is a concept that exists in Islam, that a father can say, no, daughter, I don't want you to marry into that culture, I want you to marry into the same culture, and his wilaya is not stripped from him, and that's the understanding that I have after speaking to certain students of knowledge and brothers. Of course, I'm a person that's an advocate for mixed marriages. Of course, you know that I'm from a British Asian Pakistani background, and Raquel's from an Afro-Caribbean background. So when it comes to the issue of marriage, I would like to ask Sister Naima and some of the guests that we have on the upcoming week about this issue. Do they believe that this is prejudice, anti-blackness? Do they believe that it's racism? Zara Ali says, I see many revert sisters together, yes, married to Pakistani brothers, but won't mix with Pakistani sisters as they get many negative vibes from Pakistani sister jealousy. So that's an interesting one. That is a very interesting one. I myself personally, I'm not so sure about that, but I think maybe it depends. For example, my sisters are all Pakistani and they have many friends because they're involved in dawah who are reverts. So I don't think we can generalize as much. Mo Ali says, look how Saudis look upon Pakistani and Indians like they are cattle. And of course, unfortunately, this is a disease that does exist in the Ummah. SubhanAllah, when I went to Saudi Arabia for the first time for Umrah, before I came to Syria, that was a big wake-up call for me when I saw the treatment of people from Bangladesh, from India, from Pakistan, in the Haram, and the treatment that they were receiving. Also people from Senegal, people from Sudan, the way that these people were looked upon as second-class citizens, that had a really big impact upon my heart. And I think generally the whole situation of many of these Arab countries needs to be addressed. For example, you can't open businesses in many of these countries without having a kafil. You cannot get citizenships in many of these countries, which I feel, of course, definitely gears towards superiority to a certain race or monopoly of a certain race over the Islamic places in a sense. Shukrat says, Nadia says, there's no superiority. Yeah, of course, there's not supposed to be any superiority. Okay, Sister Naima's back. Inshallah, we'll ask Sister Naima when she comes in, inshallah. The marriage issue is deeper than that, inshallah. Alright, so, alhamdulillah, we've got Sister Naima back. I don't know what happened, maybe your phone died or something happened with you.
Yeah, it did. I'm sorry about
that. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. No problems. Okay, so we were moving on in the discussion, and we had some questions coming in and so on and so forth. In regards to yourself facing difficulties as a black Muslim, you said that it was more geared towards your husband and your children. And is this something that you fear for till today? Do you fear that your children will suffer more discrimination than yourself because of the fact that they look more black in a sense?
Yeah, Bismillah. I think we had been living in Egypt for about 11 years, and Egyptians have their own brand of racism, anti-blackness, meaning where they do have prejudiced ideas about black people, even their own black people, Nubians. But my children did not really feel that very strongly. They just didn't experience that. And they only became aware of being black when they came back to England last year. And they go to a school which is majority Muslim. They go to school which is majority Muslim. It's not a Muslim school, but it's a majority Muslim school. In this case, it's mainly Pakistanis. And the thing that hurts me is that my sons now don't like Pakistanis. Why? Because Pakistanis are racist. Why do you say that? Because they call us names. They drop the N-word. You know, they try to kind of, you know, try to be road with us, you know, as if that's the only way that we can kind of talk to them. They're constantly asking, are you sure you're Muslim? How come you're not Pakistani? You know, because we're in a small town up north. So, you know, I don't blame the kids at the end of the day. They're not exposed. They don't know that there's a huge ummah out there of people of all sorts, you know, not just Pakistanis or Indians. But the thing is,
how old is your son? How old is your son, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, one is 15 and the other's 12. So, you know, they kind of come into this, you know, small town Pakistani mentality where being Muslim equals being Pakistani. And if you're not Pakistani, you can't be Muslim, you know? And if you say you're Muslim, but you're not Pakistani, we don't think that that's right, you know, because we know that all Pakistanis are Muslims and Muslims are Pakistani. But what I don't like and what worries me is that my children, at the end, I said this to them. I said, look, we live in the UK. I work, and it sounds so strange for me to say this, but I know lots of good Pakistanis, you know. I work with Pakistanis, the people that I work with in terms of charity and business, etc. They're all Pakistanis and they're amazing brothers and sisters. And I don't want your experience with these kids in school to put you off your brothers in faith, because it's no longer a brothers in faith thing, because they're not being treated like brothers in faith. They're being treated like black boys. You know what I mean? In that sense, you know, that statement that kind of blew up and made this whole thing kind of front page news. Being black is wrong. Being black is bad. Being black is jahil. Being black is not to be desired. It's not desirable for a Muslim. And so, you know, this is the thing that I said to them, is that when we go to an event and we go to a talk, it's going to be majority Pakistanis there. If you now get a chip on your shoulder about Pakistanis because of the way they've treated you, you will no longer feel comfortable in those spaces. And that is what's happening. It's where you're finding black Muslims tired of the microaggressions and not feeling comfortable in Muslim spaces anymore. And for me, that's really damaging, because it means that we will start to segregate ourselves to protect ourselves. Because why should you go into an environment where you're constantly being, you know, either kind of questioned or doubted or kind of shunned because you're a different race or because you're black? It doesn't make any sense. And so for me,
okay, so I've got two questions for you. Yeah. I've got two questions for you, because you said something really interesting. Sorry to cut you, but you said something really interesting, and I don't want to lose the point. You said that they are being treated as black boys, and black in a sense means ghetto or not desirable, etc., etc. So the comments that brother Abu Ibrahim made, and of course I don't want to make it about the brother, is that something that rings a bell with you? Is that something that you think, subhanAllah, is something that in a sense people are not taught, I don't think that's the right word, but an image or perception that they're given from young? Is that something that you feel in a sense?
Do you remember when there were those riots in London and they were breaking into shops? The violence in North London, and it led to those riots across London. And that historian, I can't even watch him and take him seriously now because of what he said, but that I can't even remember his name, but that historian, white English professor, is huge. A historian went on TV and he said, the whites have become black. What did he mean by that? He meant the whites have become ghetto, have become sub-working class, have become violent, have become without morals, have become unruly, have become rebellious, have become all these things, as if that identifies black culture. And this is a very, very dangerous thing that we see happening in the UK. If you remember, there was a time when you hardly ever saw black people on TV. Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you hardly ever saw black people on TV. Then somebody realized that no, there's money to be made out of black people. There's money to be made out of portraying ghetto culture. There's money to be made out of portraying those boys, those bad men, those road men, etc. in the estates, and the drugs and the gangs and the violence. There's money to be made here. And so you start seeing movies coming out, you start seeing film series coming out, and you start seeing certain artists being, musical artists being promoted and put on the mainstream stage. And what that did was give everybody this image of black culture as a ghetto, violent, gang-based culture that is all about, hip-hop and grime, and it kind of gets all mixed in there. So on one level, I don't blame people, because the whole society was treated to this version of black identity. And within the black community, it's something that we needed to resist more. We shouldn't have been so seduced by the fact that, they want to produce another film about us. We should have been a lot more, selective about the stories that we allowed to be told about ourselves. But hey, it is what it is. The point is that Muslims and non-Muslims are being spoon-fed a version of black identity that is a small part of the demographic. It does not look at the intellectual tradition. It doesn't look at the history. It doesn't look at the true art. It doesn't look at the values. It doesn't look at the language. It does not celebrate black culture at all. In fact, it objectifies black culture and allows it to be sold and commodified, and that's what's happening. And so Muslims are also experiencing this, because the kids in my boys' school, when they want to be down and they want to be cool, who do they talk like? They say wagwan.
That's right.
What's up, bro? What's popping, and all of this stuff, because in their minds that's cool. That whole roadman mentality, that is true. It is inspired by a certain aspect of black culture, but trust me when I say those boys can do it better than anyone else. And for anyone to come out and say acting like a gangster is black, you go to Whitechapel and check out those gangster boys there, those Bengali boys. You go to Rotherham, yeah? You go to Ravensthorpe, you go to Dewsbury, you go to Bradford, and check out those little boys there who are selling drugs, who are packing knives, who are, robbing and doing all these illegal things. They've got their own ghetto culture, which has got nothing to do with blackness. I don't even know any black people. That's their own thing. So we need to be careful to not say that, oh, all of that stuff is from outside. It's those dirty black people or those dirty white people. Our culture doesn't have anything like that. We've got it in our cultures as well. Somali boys too.
But you see, that's the interesting thing that you're saying, because a lot of the elder generation, like I've seen this myself from our aunties and uncles, this is that we have in our culture, and our children have learned this, for example, from a certain community, maybe the black community or so on and so forth. But if we look back home, for example, we do have drug dealers in Pakistan. We have a massive drugs trade, and we do have all of these gangs and violence and corruption and so on and so forth. So to say that this is something that is attributed to a certain community, I mean, of course, is definitely unfair. I think what you're saying about media being a major part of it, of course, is definitely something that has a major part to play in this. But what can we do now as Muslims? Because of course we're living in the bigger, wider world, and we're exposed to this kind of stuff. So us as a Muslim community now, so if we were to bring it back down to a smaller level and say us as British Muslims in the UK, what are the solutions that we can come up with? So for example, I'd like you to answer it in two tiers. So solutions for black Muslims and solutions for non-black Muslims, in a sense.
Okay, you're not going to like what I have to say about this, because actually I don't think that black Muslims have a problem. Like, there's no solution for black Muslims, because the racism issue is not our doing. We didn't create it. We can't actually change it, because we are just being who we were made to be. We're black. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with melanin, with curly hair, with broad noses, with full lips, and everything else that comes with it, with the way of speaking, the way of being in the family, our values, our voices, and everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ourselves, we shouldn't have to do anything, okay? When we sort of problematize the minority, or the oppressed group, and we say, oh, what should you be doing about the problem? You're problematizing the group. The group hasn't done anything. The group is just being who Allah made them, which is black. So as for what black people can do, we need to stay whole and to maintain who we are and make sure our children do not grow up either hating themselves or hating other Muslims because of the way that they've been treated. We have to guard our children, and we have to guard our own iman. So anybody, for example, who is feeling conflicted about being Muslim because of the way Muslims are being treated, we need to protect ourselves and protect our iman and gain knowledge and work on ourselves, because at the end of the day, it's like we are the ones who are suffering the onslaught here. So we have to protect ourselves and continue to grow, continue to learn, continue to flourish in spaces where we are free to flourish. So that is for my, and Allah knows best, but that's what I feel about what black Muslims need to do. Non-black Muslims, I feel, need to take a long, hard look at their visceral response to the accusation of racism. Very often the response is defensiveness, okay? Because everybody knows racism is wrong. Everybody knows racism is haram. Everybody, I'm sure, has heard that extremely explicit hadith which warns the person that boasts about their lineage, right? Everyone knows that. So your response to being accused of racism, you need to examine it, because a lot of the time, if we're honest with ourselves, we will find that, you know what, it's true. I do think that black people are less attractive. I do think that black people are more prone to violence. I do think that black people have a problem because there are more of them in jail, or they're always entertainers and they're always sports people. This is what I believe. That's step one. Step one is accepting where you are, being honest with yourself, okay? Maybe you have messages from when you were young. Maybe you remember things that you watched. Maybe you remember what people told you that made you come to this conclusion, okay? First step, acknowledge where you are. Second step, try to work on it, because the roots of racism, as I said before, are pride and chauvinism. And in our deen, there is no room for that. That's the second thing. You need to start educating yourself. You need to start listening without prejudice. So when a black person tells you that this is how they feel, listen without prejudice. Don't get defensive. Don't say, oh, but we're not all like that. Oh, it's not as bad as you think. Oh, I think you have a chip on your shoulder. All of those responses, they're not allowed. Yeah, because that's just defensiveness. That's your own ego getting in the way of you learning something. So that's the second thing. The third thing, put yourself in the shoes of the other. As I said at the beginning of this discussion, Asians, Arabs, of any color, we are not strangers to racism. We know what it is. So when you decide to put yourself in the shoes of the other, you imagine if that was you in that situation, being spoken to in that way, being treated in that way, being judged in that way. And if you're not cool with how that feels, then you need to start making some changes. Because at the end of the day, you know what? SubhanAllah, everything is leveled. Within the wider society, Muslims are the minority and Muslims are discriminated against. But it's as if in our own communities, we feel the need to be on top and have other people on the bottom. So at the end of the day, to the rest of the world, we're Muslim, okay? But within our own community, if we cannot do what the early Muslims did and understand that it's about the deen, it's about iman, and it's about akhirah, if we can't understand that, and we put all these other things, cultural chauvinism, racism, superiority complex, and all that kind of thing, we put that ahead of our iman, and the bond that should be between Muslims, due to the fact that we believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, if we can't do that, this particular disease is not going anywhere. But the difference is, black people are angry now. And black people are prepared to go a separate way, which means that this has a true potential to divide this ummah in a way it never has before. And that's why it's important that we examine ourselves first, pluck out that disease, seek refuge in Allah, make trouble for it. This is no small thing. This is pride in your mind, and that's my word on it.
Do you see, subhanAllah, you said something again that's really striking to me, that you said, subhanAllah, do you see that is where we're heading as a British Muslim community, that you will find now that black Muslims are starting to go their own way and saying, you know what, we need to open our own masajid and do our own thing now and
Yeah.
just, you know, forget all of
Yeah.
these other communities.
100%. 100%.
Subhanallah, that's the,
It won't be everyone. It won't be everyone. But of course, there are already sort of African Muslims who had their own thing ever since the 50s. You know that already. The Nigerian community has always had its own masajid. They've always had their own programs and their own organizations, etc. So that's that. But this would be something different, because this would be basically us as black people feeling like it's just the same as not being Muslim. You know, in a non-Muslim society, as a black person, you are disrespected, your lineage is not respected, your history is not taught, etc., etc. That erasure happens in the wider community. If that is happening in the Muslim community as well, I don't think that is a strange thing or a far off thing to find black Muslims wanting to be in a safe space. And I know this for a fact because we've already had, I think, 2 Eids that were specifically a black Muslim arranged Eid. Mainly, yeah, it was Blackout Eid last year, and there was another one just this year. There's already been the Black Muslim Awards, and all of this is a response. It's a reaction. It's a reaction to being unnoticed. It's a reaction to being ignored. It's a reaction to being a minority and an unrecognized minority, if you understand what I'm saying. And when you're a minority,
understand, yeah.
you're outnumbered, right? But you feel like, no, we need to, there's lots of signs that point in that direction. I'm not saying it's all bad.
I mean,
because some of it is good. Some of it is
I
good.
want to.
Like you've got Muslim Times, for example, which is a newspaper, an online newspaper that literally celebrates the achievements of black Muslims, and that's fine. But when you're talking about Muslims praying separately because they don't feel accepted, because they feel less than when they go to a particular area, that is a big problem. That is a very, very big problem.
Yani, subhanAllah, I want, in regards to people not understanding the issue, I mean, I've had people this week tell me that you're a sellout, you're a, what do you call it, a soft Pakistani, you've lost your culture. One person even said to me, a practicing brother, look, why do you only have black people speaking this week? You should have some Asians speaking as well. I said, I mean, for me, of course, inshallah, of course, I will speak to some brothers and sisters that are Asian, and I would like to have their input as well. And I think it's important for everyone to open up this dialogue, because I feel personally myself, even though I'm married to someone who's from Afro-Caribbean descent, I think I still have some maybe ignorances inside me and stuff that I don't understand, because I know since I've been married to Raquel, there's certain times that I've said dumb stuff and she's been like, look, you can't say that, or you know, you can't do that. So I think it's a learning process for everyone. And subhanAllah, there's an interesting comment here. Brother Shaukat Rafiq says, agreed to the point that there is racism amongst the Asian community, but have to disagree with the sister that they don't have a problem. Alhamdulillah, not all, but there are some that do look down upon the Asian community as weak, timid, etc. amongst the men and women, but not all. So both communities need to unite and drop these actions. May Allah unite us all. I think what he's saying is that he agrees with you to the extent that you say that, of course, there's a lot of work in the Asian community or with non-black Muslims, but he's saying at the same time that the black community here, there are people from within the black Muslim community that look down upon Asians and so on and so forth. What do you think about that?
The line was really bad, so I didn't get that point. Actually, I couldn't hear what he was saying. What was he saying about the Pakistani community?
He's saying that basically he agrees with the fact that you said there's racism amongst the Asian community, but where he's saying that he disagrees with you is the fact that black Muslims don't have a problem. He's saying that there's certain black people that may not be a majority, they're a minority, that look down upon the Asian community as weak, timid, and etc. Insult the culture and so on and so forth.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, no, totally. I think that every culture has its own version of chauvinism. I believe that. Okay. Is it racism? That's open to debate, because if black Muslims think that Asian men are weak, so what? Who cares? What difference does it make? Like, seriously, it's a cultural chauvinism and maybe a prejudice, but like, what difference does it make? How many Asian men are banging down the door to marry their daughters, to be told by the black brother, nah, bruv, nah, you're too weak, you're not having my daughter. It's the power dynamic is not the same. And that's why a lot of people say, if you're in the minority and you don't have the power, you can't really be racist in that sense because you have no power. So if black brothers have got some strange ideas about Asians, they need to work on that as well. But they don't have any authority with those opinions. Whereas we're in a community where majority are Asian. So this thing of marriage, and somebody mentioned that in the comments, subhanallah, you know, this is really where you see it coming out. What is it about that black person that is so repellent to you that you do not want your daughter or your son marrying them? Is it because of the way they look? Is it because you think they won't be dutiful like an Asian girl would? You know, is it because you don't want your grandchildren having curly hair? Is it because you're going to be embarrassed in front of the community that your child's so dark? These are illnesses. You can have a personal preference for yourself. That's fine. If you're into white girls, you're into white girls. If you're into black men, you're into black men. That's a personal preference. But if it's become structural, if you marry a Gora, it's okay as long as she, you know, kind of makes roti and she, you know, she toes the line and she wears her shalwar and she respects her mother-in-law, because at the end of the day, the children are going to be fair. And that's a good thing. You're going to put that in the newspaper when you're looking for a husband for her. You know, she's fair, she's got green eyes, all that nonsense, okay? All of that, all of those things, they are signs of that same illness. Why does it matter that the girl is fair? Why does it matter that the girl I don't get it.
It's really interesting that you brought up this topic of marriage, because I was discussing this with a student of knowledge, someone who's quite prominent in the Muslim community, and he said, look, we need to understand, is this prejudice, is this anti-blackness, or is this racism? What would you describe it as? What would you describe it as? Would you say it's prejudice? Would you say it's anti-blackness? Would you say it's racism? What would you say it is?
If there is a young man who has a preference for blondes, that's his business. If there is a young woman who has a preference for, I don't know, whatever, that's her business. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't tell us we have to marry any particular type. We're looking for deen and we're looking for character. Anything else, basically, it's what floats your boat. The issue is here, structurally, the system is set up to prefer certain types over others. It's not just a race thing, there are other things involved as well. But from when it's normal in a community to say she's fair, that is an issue for me. Because Asians are not fair by nature. They're brown at the end of the day. They're just different shades of brown. Why would a mother-in-law care any whit about this complexion of her daughter-in-law's skin? Why? If she's fair, does that mean she's more honest, that she's more loving, that she has more iman, that she's more religious? Nothing to do with it. It's simply that prejudice. And I'm sorry, if someone says to me that, oh, you know, it's just personal preference, I would say that, well, no, the system is set up, the whiter you are, the better off. So like I said,
okay, so
many Asians,
okay, so that's
it. For you to marry apne. Okay, let me just finish my point. Many Asians, mashallah, bless their souls, they would prefer for you to marry apne. And to be honest, it's fine, yeah, because the culture is the same, and maybe many black people would prefer that you marry black too, and that's fine. Maybe white people would actually prefer their kids marry white. That's fine, yeah. But the problem is when a person comes to you, and that's the first and the only thing you see, their race, their color. Not only is that the first thing you see, but you can be okay with a Bosnian brother. You can be okay with a woman a Swedish girl who took Shahada. That's okay. But a Senegalese, a Zambian, a Nigerian, a Jamaican, no.
Okay,
that's when you
okay, but
it's not the same.
Okay, wouldn't we say we're conflating issues here? Wouldn't you say that this is colorism? Because of course this exists within the black community as well. So for example, you have that. I remember when I was in school, black kids would say to other black kids, oh, look how blick so-and-so is. Yeah. And we have this in Nigeria. You've got a industry of skin lightening and skin bleaching, which is millions and millions of God knows how many dollars it is. So can we say that, of course, this is just restricted to a certain community, and is this a wider problem, or is this just something that relates to? Because I don't think we can say this is just a Muslim problem. This is a wider issue which is
No.
infiltrated into lots of cultures.
But this is the point, you see, is that Muslims are not immune from those wider issues. We're not immune. And colorism has its roots in racism. It has its roots in a hierarchy. That's what we're talking about here, a hierarchy based on race. I believe it was Darwin who came up with that one, okay? But basically, white on top, okay? And then various shades going down until black African probably is the lowest. That hierarchy is what leads to colorism. It's based on the idea that the lighter you are, you know, the more desirable, the more beautiful, etc. But that hierarchy is not a natural thing. In the Victorian times, they did believe it was natural. It was a natural thing to prefer a paler woman or a fairer woman than a darker one. But it's not natural, because when you go deep into cultures that are not affected by Western whatever, you'll find that they don't look at things like that. They don't look at skin color. They look at other things. They look at body type maybe. They look at, you know, the shape of her face. You know, does she have a round face or a long face? In some countries, as you know, they prefer their women really big. Okay, so those whole ideals of beauty that are based on grades of color, I believe they came directly from racism. They're not a naturally occurring thing. That's definitely, it has its roots in racism. And racism and that grading system is anti-black, because it's a structure that prefers whiteness over blackness, that elevates whiteness and denigrates blackness. That's the structure we're working in here. And in our own communities, maybe we're replicating that. Maybe not knowingly, maybe we don't realize it, but trust me, if you do some thinking and you do some reading, you'll realize that, wow, actually, that's probably where it came from, because why else? You know, that's Allahu A'lam, but that's what I think on it.
Okay, sister here, Shahana Kabiri, says, Sister Naima, what advice would you give me? I am Asian, raising 2 mixed-race, dark-skinned daughters.
Right, mashallah, tabarakallah, says, beautiful question, beautiful question. You need to love those girls for who they are, okay? I said this to a friend of mine who also has a daughter by her husband who's Jamaican, and she's from an Asian family. And I said to her, it may not come naturally to you because you are just who you are. You grew up in a Pakistani house and that's what you know. You need to make an effort. First, you need to love them for who they are. Second, you need to make sure that they are surrounded by positivity about who they are. So buy them books about children who look like them. Read to them about children who look like them. Celebrate the other culture, okay? Don't ignore whatever their father was. Don't ignore that. Don't pretend that it's not there and, you know, they're just like you. Don't do that. And make sure that you celebrate whatever it is that makes them different, their skin color, their hair, the hair texture, whatever it is. You may need to do some learning. Go on YouTube and do some, if they have particularly curly hair, you may need to go on YouTube and learn how to take care of it properly. If they're black girls, they may need like a bit more moisturizing on their skin. You need to just make sure that you feel wholly comfortable in embracing them for who they are, because they will learn it from you and other people will learn from you as well. This friend of mine, when she took her daughter to a gathering, one of the aunties said, oh, she's so dark. She's really taken after her father. Everybody was very uncomfortable with that, okay? But I said, you should have called her out, because that type of comment there, because she was saying, oh, she's really so dark, and she kept commenting on the fact that she's so dark, she's so dark. And then somebody said, oh, no, she looks like you. And she said, no, I'm not that dark. Where does that come from? That comes from those levels we were talking about. And I said to her, you never let any of your aunties or uncles or cousins talk to your daughters in a way that makes them feel bad about who they are. Never allow it. You're going to have to be that lioness sometimes, protecting them. Because remember what I said before? Protecting our children, protecting our iman, protecting our sense of identity. They will need that from you, especially as they're growing up. And then inshallah, you will not have problems with them, because they'll be proud to be whatever mix they are. And they'll be proud because my mom raised me to love myself, to love every piece of how Allah made me. And that's how we all have to be, regardless of how Allah made me.
Jazakallah khair, excellent advice. Subhanallah, that's something I think we can really relate to. Obviously, me myself, I'm a dark-skinned Asian, and Raquel is actually lighter than me, which is the funny thing. But of course, we're in Syria, so many of the people here they make these kind of comments. So, for example, one of my daughters is lighter than my other daughter, so they'll say, "Oh, ma ahlaha, look how beautiful she is because she's light." And I always say to Raquel, I say, look, you can't have that. You got to be strong. You got to let these people know what time it is, because I don't want any of my kids feeling that way. And if you're weak, if you're strong, if mummy's strong, then it will empower them. But if you're weak as well, and you just let people say stuff like that, it's gonna have an impact on them. And subhanAllah, it's sad how shallow people are in a sense, but unfortunately you're right, this is a wider issue that we have. And maybe this is something that inshallah, if one day we are blessed to live in a khilafah, this is something that it will address. Another sister here has got a question for you, and anyone else that's watching, if you'd like to share and let other people get involved, alhamdulillah, we've got about 150 people watching. Please share. You can ask your own questions to Sister Naima. She's got a very interesting perspective. One of the sisters here said, Fahima bint Abdul Salam says, Salam, what advice can you give to Asian Muslims to make black Muslims feel more inclusive within the Muslim community?
Oh, mashallah. Love this question. Barakallah fi. I got my answer right up. The first thing is, let's be humble believers. Let us be humble believers who treat our brothers and sisters in Islam exactly the same, regardless of their cultural or racial or economic background, okay? Let's be humble believers. Guess what? It's as easy as saying, Assalamu alaikum. Would you believe that there are people in our community who actually don't get a salam because of the color of their skin? It's as simple as understanding she's a believer and I'm a believer, and at the end of the day, I respect her for who she is. And that's a big thing, I think, for especially in Asian communities. Be a bit humble, like just be a bit humble, because at the end of the day, there are other people who have their own culture and their own way and their own food that you might actually learn from, and you might actually enjoy, and you might actually feel has something to teach you. And again, this will combat the cultural chauvinism, because you're understanding that you're coming from a humility to say, who are you? Like, talk to me about you, teach me about who you are. I want to know, because I want to understand how you flex, what you're saying, where you're coming from, not because I want to judge you or because I want to become you, but because I just want to know who you are as a person. And this is part of who you are as a person. Just make it a safe space where the person feels free to be themselves. And that will make a huge difference. That will make a huge difference.
Okay, there's another sister here, Isra. She says, I know sisters that stopped saying salam to other Muslims because they were tired of people not responding. So what would your advice be to sisters who are of color and now they feel tired, or they feel, how can I say, in a sense of loss with the Muslim community that's around them? What advice would you give these people? Is that something that you faced yourself? Is that something that you have experience with, where you were just so fed up with the Muslim community that you were around? What advice would you have for this sister?
I think at the end of the day, I think that, everybody has the right to protect themselves. Okay. So if you are constantly putting yourself in an environment or in a place where you are feeling, disrespected or humiliated or not accepted for who you are, you have a right not to put yourself in that position again and again. So I think that we cannot say to people who are being, stigmatized, or who are being oppressed, or who are being, it's the word I'm looking for, who are being discriminated against. No, you have to keep coming back to that place. You have to stay in that place where you're being discriminated against, because I don't think that's fair to people, and it actually can be really damaging to their iman. It can actually damage them as Muslims to constantly expose themselves to that kind of ignorance and that kind of pressure. So I don't think it's for me or anyone else to say to a sister, no, no, you still have to go to that masjid where they're all.
Assalamu alaikum. I don't know.
I don't think it's my place to say that. That's the first thing. So that is about people having to understand that this is real and it damages people and it hurts people. And I don't really think that born Muslims appreciate the isolation of being a convert. For many of us, okay? MashaAllah, most Muslims come from Muslim families, often very big Muslim families. They're part of a community. They belong. Who they are, okay? Because they've always been, right? Converts or reverts give all of that up. The community they grew up in, the identity they grew up with, often the family that nurtured them up until this stage, they often make a huge break from that. And they come into the faith with promises of, we're one ummah, we're brothers and sisters, you know, we're all equal, you know, there's no racism in Islam, there's no prejudice in Islam, you know, you're like a newborn baby, la la la, all of that stuff, okay? And they come in expecting to be embraced, and instead they are shunned. And this is a very, very big problem that every community that has got people in its midst who are accepting Islam should have a strategy. And I get it. I understand that it's something new, you know. Our communities we're not used to it, especially like 10, 15, 20 years ago. We had a Pakistani mosque, an Indian mosque, a Bengali mosque, and everyone knew each other, and everyone spoke the same language, and everyone was, the khutbah was in Urdu. You know, it was clear cut, you know. And then these white people and these black people and these Sikhs and Hindus start becoming Muslim, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, hold on, how are we going to accommodate these people? They don't have families of their own. We don't really want to marry our children to them, to be honest. They don't speak our language, they don't eat our food. Like, how are we going to deal with that? And I think the previous generation had to deal with that, but this generation doesn't have an excuse, because this generation grew up with those black kids, those white kids, those Sikhs, those Hindus. We all went to school together. So for us in our communities now, we're the elders, even though the elders are still around, but those of us who are like in our 30s and 40s, we are the ones who will set the culture moving forward. So every community that has got reverts in its midst must have a strategy for how to embrace those converts and reverts within the ummah. What does that look like? How about having khutbahs in English? How about having khutbahs in English alongside Urdu, rather than a khutbah every week in Urdu, so that those of us who are not Urdu speaking cannot gain anything from the khutbah? That's a simple change. And you know what? I know we're kind of digressing here, but if you look at it in terms of, say, for example, deaf Muslims, okay? It's the same thing. Deaf Muslims are a minority, yeah? But we know as a community that we must embrace them, because if we don't embrace them, where will they go? So we have to make sure that our communities are safe spaces for all sorts of people, not just black people, not just converts. What about deaf people? What about single mothers? What about disabled Muslims? What about Muslims with depression? Our communities must become safe spaces, because right now they're not. We can change that.
SubhanAllah,
it's
interesting. SubhanAllah, it's interesting, just as you're saying that. Sister Sarah says, I have never been so lonely until I came to Islam. Seriously. So inshallah, obviously we're really upset to hear something like that. So inshallah, one of the admins, inshallah, will send you a message, and inshallah we'll try and get some sisters that are local to you to come and see you, inshallah ta'ala. The question I was going to ask you two questions, because you raised some really good points. One was that you said that people are angry and we can't expect them to react in the way that we want them to. And now I was criticized heavily for having dialogue with a certain person. I don't want to name a person and expose maybe some of the things that they've said or done, but Yani, I was getting smashed for speaking to a certain individual. People messaged me and said that it's haram what you've done. People are going to stop supporting your charity. this is a maslaha and mafsada, this is a mafsada for you, that people are going to stop speaking to you, and so on and so forth. And because of some of the offensive comments that this brother had made, what do you think of something? Do you think that this dialogue should have happened? Do you think even if someone, and because the way I thought about it in my mind is that this brother's not acting in a way that is normal, and maybe he's been pushed to this because of certain experiences that he's had. We need somebody, instead of everybody attacking him, we need somebody to reach out to this brother.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this? What do you think?
I'm just going to give a disclaimer right now. I don't know the full extent of the comments that were made. Okay, I saw the initial video and I knew that he had responded and that he was very vocal about it, but I actually don't know the full extent of what he said. So just bear my comments within that context. I actually don't know the full extent of what he said. What I will say is that people don't want to hear it. Okay, the reality is that most people are quite happy with the situation. They're quite comfortable because it's not affecting them. That's the reality. I'll give you another example. If we have a sisters issue, and we do have sisters issues that come up, issues that are really affecting certain sisters, okay, whether it's predatory sheikhs or whatever, yeah, most people are not affected by those issues. To be honest, they don't want to hear about them. Okay, they've got their own lives, they've got their own worries, and it's like, you know what, just pipe down a bit. You know, you're making too much out of this, you're making too much of a big deal, and to be honest, we don't want to have to deal with that. Okay, I think in the community and in general in society, people are like that. But the issue is that this blew up because it touched a raw nerve, and it's not made up. No one's making stuff up here. It blew up because it touched a raw nerve. If you reached out to the brother to have a dialogue with him, I commend you for that, because at the end of the day, it's convenient for people to look at him and say, oh, he's a rogue element and he's like a lone wolf, you know, the whole lone wolf thing, and he's talking for himself, and you know, he's just crazy, basically. Like, just ignore him, he's crazy. But the reality
I mean,
is,
some of the things that people were saying was this, that where's the empirical evidence? This is just anecdotal, this is just maybe just his experiences, etc., etc. What would you say to people who make comments like this?
You can see what's happening there, right? You can see what's happening there. Defensiveness, walls coming up. No, it's not happening. I haven't seen it with my own eyes, so it can't be true. If a people come to you, and let's take race out of the dynamic for a minute. If deaf Muslims, one day something kicks off and deaf Muslims start talking, and they start talking about how they feel alienated in their communities because people don't bother to have a sign language person, like someone doing sign language at the khutbah, or that in Islamic schools there is no provision for them, and they start coming out with their experiences of people's, you know, telling their parents, oh, why did you keep her? Oh, you must be so sad that he's deaf. How will he ever get married? And all of this stuff, right? There will be people who will say, what's your evidence? How do we know that's really happening to you? Oh, but surely it's not everybody. And again, what is that? That's defensiveness. People don't want to hear it, okay? But they are the ones with the problem, not the people who are speaking out. The people who don't want to hear it are the ones who have the problem, because they're not ready to humble themselves and listen without prejudice, like I said before, and hear what people are saying, hear the pain, hear the frustration, hear the disappointment. No one came into this deen expecting this rubbish. No one came in. I'll give another example, okay? If sisters start coming out and saying that, you know, there's too much domestic violence in the community, or brothers are divorcing sisters without reason and they're not looking after their children, okay? And it blows up. You know for a fact those Twitter feeds are going to be boom, 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 boom. There will be those who will say, these sisters have got a chip on their shoulder. These sisters have got a problem. These sisters are feminists. What's the empirical evidence? You know, blah, 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 blah. The reality is they don't want to hear it, okay? They don't want to hear it. But what is upon us is to listen without prejudice to other people's pain, because when you listen without prejudice, like I said, you will hear what's really going on. No one came to Islam expecting to be abused, expecting to be used, expecting to be insulted, expecting anything like this to happen systematically. So those of us who are in a privileged position of not having experienced that, we need to take a chill pill and get some humility and sit down and say, you know what? This is not my experience. This is not my story, but I respect you enough to listen to your story and accept that this is your truth and this is what you've gone through. And for me, if people could do that and stop jumping up and down being defensive, this situation would have reached its conclusion a lot faster. But the reason that it's going and growing and growing and growing is because people are like, no, 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 it's not happening. It's not happening. You're crazy. The problem is with you. You guys have got the issue. And that's not going to deal with the problem at all.
Okay, so I've got another question. Do you think that in the UK, take it back to UK, there's a certain community that is more racist than or has a certain more anti-blackness towards the black Muslims than other communities? Do you think it comes mostly from Asians or mostly from Arabs? Is that something you're willing to comment on? Just give me 1 second. I need to plug my charger in, but I'm listening, yeah? So you can just answer that, inshallah.
I don't think so. I don't think that there is, to be honest. I couldn't put, is it more Pakistanis, more Indians, more Bengalis, more Kurdish, Turkish, Arab? No idea. No idea, sorry. I don't think that there's that much difference.
For yourself, have you suffered it more from a certain community or not?
I think the only thing I can say is that the more dominant a culture is, the easier it is for their opinions to oppress others. I'm going to say that again so it makes sense to me, okay? The more dominant a particular race or culture is, the easier it is for their prejudices to oppress others. And that's why I said earlier about, you know, can black people be really racist? You know, does it matter that black men think Asian men are weak? They don't have the ability to make people suffer from that opinion, okay? So maybe if we have communities in the UK that don't have that dominant position, like Kurdish people, for example, okay? There are not that many of them. They're not that influential, okay? They don't really control much of what goes on. So their prejudice doesn't really have the power to oppress others. So maybe it's
not really seen.
It's not really about who's more racist. It's who has more power to influence others with their racist ideas. I think that's what it is. And that will always be the dominant culture, whether it's Indians in one town or Pakistanis in another city or whatever, the dominant culture, whatever prejudices it has, because it's dominant, it can make people suffer because of its own ideas and its own prejudices. And I hope that makes sense. I just thought that answer just now, but I think that's the case. So say, for example, Somalis may have their own prejudices against Pakistanis, right? Fair enough. But how many Pakistanis are going to Somali families trying to marry their daughters? Not that many. You know, how many Pakistanis are dying to pray the Eid Salah in a Somali masjid or wanting to be an imam in a Somali masjid? The power balance is not the same. So that's my take on that.
Okay, the fact that you mentioned Somalis is interesting because this is something that I wanted to understand. A lot of the time you would hear, maybe not so in the black Muslim community, but within black people, they would look at Somali people. I remember in my school, that's what it was like. They'll be like, no, they're not real black people, they're Somalis. Yeah. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is, don't some of these complexes exist within the black community as well? And isn't that something that we need to look at? I know you're saying that they're a minority, but at the same time, some of these do exist within black communities too.
Okay, first off, like I said before, I'm not here claiming that any community is free of prejudice. Remember I said that. Cultural chauvinism exists in every community, okay? Cultural pride is a good thing. It's good to be pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with. You know, if you're Bengali, be happy to be Bengali. If you're from Zanzibar, be happy to be from Zanzibar. That's it, Allah's qadr. So it's cool, it's fine. But within the black community, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying any community is free of that prejudice. You know, we all have it. So Nigerians versus Ghanaians, you know, Jamaicans versus Nigerians. There's all of that stuff going on. But again, influence and power. Within the black community, who has got the power and authority to make other people suffer for their prejudices? There's not really anyone. there really isn't any dominant black culture. You know, like Jamaicans don't dominate the black cultural scene, even though their culture is very strong. They don't have influence, they don't have money, they don't have power to make other black people suffer because they're not Jamaican. Do you see what I'm saying?
Understand, yeah, understand.
Yeah, so those things are there, but what we are really talking about is structural stuff. We're talking about, you know, institutions here. We're talking about institutionalized ideas, not people's personal preferences or people's personal prejudices. We're talking about a whole structure, and we all make up the structure. We are all part of that structure. And so we need to individually examine ourselves and then examine the structure and understand the structure for what it is, and sometimes it requires us stepping out of who we are to see it from the outside in order to be able to see that structure the way other people experience it, especially if you're from the dominant group.
Okay, so my penultimate question is this. Do you think that there's a change? Do you think that from 10 years ago, 15 years ago till now, because I asked Brother Nabil this question and he said no, outright no, I don't see there's no change, and the situation is bad as it's ever been, and the Muslim community is still the way it is. Like I, for one, obviously I'm a Londoner, and I see that there's a big difference between being in London to being up north. I think it's far worse up north in certain communities. So do you think that there's a change? That, for example, some places, I think a lot of masajid in London do their khutbah in English. Okay, whereas I think in many of the northern places like Bradford and Rotherham and these kind of places, you'd be hard pressed to find Asian masjids that do khutbah in English. So do you think that there is a change? Are certain areas better than other areas? What do you think?
I would say that the one indicator that I would say of change is the fact that there are more intermarriages. Our parents' generation, I don't even know what percentage of intermarriage there was in that generation. In our generation, you can see intermarriage is a thing, you know, not widespread, but it happens. You're an example of that, okay? And I know too many examples of that. That mixing started with our generation. And obviously the elders had to get their heads around that because it was something that was totally, you know, something that they would never have expected, you know, something they did not want, something that they were not prepared for. But our generation having mixed, so you'll find Asian families who have actually got other races in the family. You know, there's a daughter-in-law from Bosnia, like I said, you know, there's a Jamaican son-in-law, you know, there is that type of mixing. And I think in those families, and in communities where there's a real mix and not a homogenous group, you will see changes there. But where there is a dominant culture and it's been kept homogenous, so, you know, basically it's all Asians, it's all Arabs, it's all whatever, with a sprinkling of others, you probably won't find attitudes changing much there, even though it's the next generation, because the mindset hasn't changed. The mindset is still the same. You know, the mindset is still, this is us, this is who we are, and this is us, you know, kind of like a fortress mentality. But where people are mixing and where people are really multicultural Muslims, I think that definitely you see a change in that.
So where you are, for example, you're up north, have you seen a change, or do you feel it's still the same, or do you feel there is a change but it's much slower in a sense? Have you seen any positive? And because obviously we want to try and end on a positive note, and we want.
Where I live is very ethnically homogenous, so that comes with its own baggage. There will be one mosque maybe that will have the khutbah in English, mainly because the people behind it are this generation. It's not the old generation. Because to be fair, most of us, our Urdu is not that good. You know, like, especially if, you know, you've got a young imam, it's a bit of a stretch, you know, to do every week a khutbah in Urdu because people's Urdu is not that great anymore, you know. So up here, and we don't really have a lot of black people in this area at all. There are some white English reverts who've married into Pakistani families, and they tell me that things have become better because when they first became Muslim, they were under a lot of pressure to become Asian. Okay, so they thought they were becoming Muslim, but actually the pressure was to become Asian, to be the perfect Asian daughter-in-law. And over the years, maybe 5-10 years, they said to me that they have regained their sense of self. and being able to go back to more or less who they actually are rather than what the Asian family wanted them to be. And they said that it's working really well for them, and there's a space for that now. And they create spaces where converts, or people who are not, Asian necessarily, can come together and, enjoy things that English people enjoy, like cups of tea and scones and stuff like that.
Okay, so the question I'm going to ask you is this: because, mashallah, you're such a strong character, why is it that you choose to live in a homogenous environment? Why haven't you chosen to go and live somewhere else where it's more multicultural, for example? I mean, why have you stayed where you are?
Oh, there's more family issues than anything else. I have a house here, so it's not. I didn't choose this area for the community. I chose this because of family ties. So, I'm an international citizen. That's what I believe. I have a life online which is rich with too many wonderful people. I travel, alhamdulillah, and I don't feel constrained by the particular physical environment. So for me, this is wonderful for us to be able to have a communication, you in Syria, me here, and mashallah, so many people attending live. And I just pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts it from us, and any mistakes are from me and the shaitan, and all is from him subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Ameen. Jazakallah khair. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. It's been a really interesting one for myself, and I'm sure for a lot of people that are watching. I'm going to ask you one last thing, and you don't have to if you don't want to. I know I might be kind of putting you on the spot, so you're not obliged. You can say no, I don't want to, whatever. I was going to say, obviously, because you're a spoken word artist and you're an author, is there something that you maybe have that you can read to us, or something that, I don't know, is fitting for people to hear?
If you had told me before, I may have brought something. As it so happens, I don't have anything, and I have to go. So my seriously, the brotherhood of man, that fundamental respect for human beings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created in all wisdom, in all justice and all fairness. Trust in Allah's wisdom, trust in his fairness, trust in his justice for creating us different and into nations that we may know each other. That there, if you hold on to that, you will retain, inshallah, your pride and your pleasure in who you are, but have enough humility to know that other people have beauty too. Other people have value, and their culture has value too. And it could even enrich you if you open yourself up to it. And subhanallah, that's all I have to say on it. Subhanakallahumma rabbana wa hamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Naima. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think that it's definitely been educational for myself. And inshallah, we look forward to maybe hearing from yourself again in the future. Definitely, I would like to have you as a guest in the future as well, if we're ever discussing any other issues. Jazakallah khairan, and Allah accept all the good work that you do and keep you steadfast. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, alhamdulillah, I hope that that was a beneficial live feed for all of you guys. I, for one, can definitely say that, alhamdulillah, Naima, definitely a very unique perspective. Alhamdulillah, she's a very strong personality. And I, for one, definitely feel that we need to have more strong sisters like herself representing different communities and talking about the issues that affect them. SubhanAllah, I feel the more that I speak to my Muslim brothers and sisters from different communities, the more that I hear the qualms and issues that they have, the more that I feel I can be more receptive, and the more that I feel that I can be more sympathetic and be a better Muslim towards them. And I think, subhanAllah, what she said there at the end is so fitting. We need to have that trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has made all of these nations. He's made all of these tribes. And every single tribe and nation has those attributes that make them beautiful, those sifat that are amazing. And we as a ummah, we need every part of the ummah to be together so that we will be successful. Right now, my dear brothers and sisters, we are seeing massacre after massacre in the Muslim lands. We're seeing slaughter after slaughter in the Muslim lands. And one of the reasons that I deeply believe is the fact, because of this hizbiyah, because of this racism that we have, because of this divisiveness that we have, Like Allah says in the Quran, that if we don't come together, then we will fail. ستفشلوا. Okay, and this is so important, that if we don't come together, if we don't compromise and come together and love each other like brothers, then we will fail. And this is what we're seeing, my dear brothers and sisters. Pakistanis think they're superior than Bengalis, Indians think they're more superior than Pakistanis, and it goes on and on. Within the Arab subculture, you'll have Arabs from the Khalij, they will think they are more Arab than Arabs from North Africa, for example. And this disease is really within us. We have to fight this, my dear brothers and sisters. My parting message to you all tonight is this: that every single of you watching, every single one of you watching right now, you can make a difference. If you go home and you discuss this with your family, if you go home and enlighten your community, talk to them about the things that Sister Naima has said today. If they have never heard these things before, if they're brushing these things under the carpet, address these issues. Your local imam, if you can go and speak to him and say, please, can we have a khutbah in English? Your local imam, if he can discuss the topic of racism, these things are so important. And if we don't hear these voices of our brothers and sisters, then we will never be able to find the cure to this disease. My dear brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khairan for tuning in. I hope it's been enlightening. Once again, this is your brother Tox Sharif, tackling this issue of racism within Muslim communities, live all the way from Syria. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, oh yeah, before I go, tomorrow night we have another guest, inshallah ta'ala, Ustaz Abu Uthama Dahabi, who is an Imam of Green Lane Masjid in Birmingham. He's also a graduate from Medina University, and inshallah we will be hearing from him firsthand his input on this topic. The day after, we also have a special guest, inshallah ta'ala. Saturday we will be speaking to another guest. Sunday another guest, inshallah. This whole week we're going to be speaking to different people to hear their voices and hear their stories. So please share, please let your friends and family know, and let's make a difference within the ummah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.